Welcome back to Black Study Snacks, where we give you bite-sized knowledge for hungry, melanated minds. I'm your host, Devon Travell, creator of Black Wall Street, the board game, and today we are exploring the foundational years that set the stage for Greenwood. We're going to talk about the Trail of Tears and how that displaced the Native Americans, and we're going to talk about the Treaty of 1866. If you haven't heard of any of these things before, don't worry, we got you. Are you ready? Are your minds hungry? Well, let's get snacking. If it is your first time tapping into Black Study Snacks, thank you. Welcome. I'm Devon Travell, creator of Black Wall Street, the board game, and your professor of Black Studies and Entrepreneurship. Giving you a little sneak peek of today, we got some learning outcomes. All right, so outcome number one, we want you to understand the historical context of the Trail of Tears and its impact on the 5 tribes. Outcome number two, we want to examine the settlement dynamics of Lassie, Oklahoma, also known as Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the utilization of enslaved Africans in developing tribal lands. Learning outcome number three, we're going to analyze the implications of the Treaty of 1866 and its role in freeing enslaved Africans on tribal lands. And number four, we're going to talk about African Americans getting the rights to land allotments and part of tribal nations. All right, those are the 4 main outcomes. Hope you buckled up. Hope you're ready. You don't necessarily need a notepad. I mean, if you're watching this in class or if you're enrolled in our class, definitely take notes. But if you're just vibing with us, continue to vibe. So our story begins with the forced relocation of the Native Americans, known as the Trail of Tears. All right, this is, of course, a very somber and sad prelude that brought primarily the 5 tribes. And we're talking about the Cherokee, Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Seminole Nation, right? Those 5 primary tribes into what is now Oklahoma. America was first recognized as an independent nation after winning the Revolutionary War against Great Britain with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. All right, what this treaty did was it ceded, right? It gave up all the rights that Great Britain had over the land in America, and it basically signed it over to the United States. But in this Treaty of Paris in 1783, there was no mention of the indigenous tribes or the right that the indigenous tribes had to those lands. Okay, so again, this basically legally gave all the land in America to the United States. Now, after winning the war, right, America was independent and it was prideful and it was hungry to continue to grow. So America, they no longer really wanted to share land and space with the indigenous population, and this sparked the efforts to relocate the tribes. So on May 28th, 1830, the Indian Removal Act was signed by President Andrew Jackson. This act authorized the forceful and violent removal of over 60,000 Native Americans. All right, I want to take a second to breathe in that 60,000 Native Americans were forced to leave their homeland. All right, and this did include members of course, the Cherokee Nation, the Muskogee Creek, Seminoles, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations. Remove them from their ancestral lands in the southeastern United States. They were pushed westward to designated Indian territories across the Mississippi, primarily to present-day Oklahoma. Now, this forced migration, often under harsh conditions, harsh winters, led to what is now known as the Trail of Tears, which was a journey that was marked with suffering, disease, and a significant loss of life. This leads us to our first question of the day, y'all. Okay. Was the Indian Removal Act of 1830 necessary for the expansion of America? One more time. Was the Indian Removal Act of 1830 necessary for the expansion of America? Go ahead and drop that answer, right? Your own reflection inside of the discussion tab if you're enrolled in our course. And if you are watching online or if you're listening, right? If you're online on YouTube, leave your comment in the video. And if you're listening, say your answer out loud in what's not a weird way. Okay. But was it necessary? Now, some people believe that Abraham Lincoln freed all the enslaved people in America with one action. In my opinion, that's incorrect, and I'm about to show you why that's incorrect, because we're going to go over the 3 steps that finally led to the emancipation of all enslaved Africans in America. So, by 1838, over 60,000 Native Americans were displaced from their homeland, the Southeast, to the new designated Indian territories bordering the Mexican borders, today, Texas. All right. Now, on this treacherous trail of tears, traveling with the Native Americans were enslaved Africans. Some Native tribes had tried to assimilate into American culture. And this process of assimilation, they started to take on some of their languages, some of their religion, and their economic system of enslaving Africans to work the land. So, again, 1838, Native Americans traveling with enslaved Africans to Oklahoma. It wasn't until 1863 that President Abraham Lincoln signed a very powerful document. If you already know what the document is, go ahead and drop that inside the comments below. If you know what it is, go ahead and drop it below. But this document, signed in the middle of the American Civil War, would be a strategic move for the North, or the Union, and could be seen as a turning point in the war. All right. So in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all the enslaved Africans in, listen closely, Confederate territories. Okay. So remember, at this time, 1863, the United States is temporarily divided into 2 separate nations. We got the North, or the Union, then we got the South, or the Confederacy. So act number 1 in starting to free the enslaved Africans was signing the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Now, after winning the Civil War, the 13th Amendment in 1865 was signed, and the 13th Amendment was supported by radical Republicans, the legendary abolitionist Frederick Douglass, and, after some convincing, President Abraham Lincoln. And what this did was it made slavery in all America illegal, unless for the punishment of a crime. All right. So action number 2, which leads to more freedom for enslaved Africans in America, is the 13th Amendment is passed in 1865, outlawing slavery in all American states, unless for the punishment of a crime. Now, while this freed all the enslaved Africans in America, it still did nothing for the folks that were in Indian territories. And I actually have a passage that I want to read from Built from the Fire by Victor Luckerson. All right, again, really great book, goes over some really good firsthand stories and narratives of people that were on the Trail of Tears, about families that were moving to Mississippi to Black Wall Street. And I want to read from page 10 of this book. Feel free to follow along with me on the screen. Let me try to put on my reading voice for y'all. Let me see if I can do my Morgan Freeman. Sango's wealth came from the land. Though he was of African heritage, he was also a tribal citizen of the Creek Nation. His mother, Phyllis, was among the first Black people to settle in what would one day be Oklahoma, arriving with the Creeks and other native tribes in the 1830s during the brutal, forced exodus known as the Trail of Tears. Black people like Phyllis weren't tribal citizens then. Native Americans, just like whites, enslaved Blacks in the Deep South and continued the practice when they arrived in the eastern half of Oklahoma, which was then known as Indian Territory. The 5 tribes, the Creeks, Cherokees, Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Seminoles, even formally sided with the Confederacy, the Civil War, though there was some dissension on the matter within their ranks. The slaves' allegiances were less ambiguous. They refused to remain in bondage. All right. So again, passage from Built from the Fire, Victor Luckerson. Definitely make sure y'all pick it up. But freedom would finally come for those that were enslaved in Oklahoma through the Treaty of 1866, which mandated the freedom of enslaved individuals held in native tribes and granted them rights within the tribes, including some land allotments. This legal recognition provided the newly freed African Americans with the resources crucial for establishing autonomy and would eventually lay the groundwork for communities like Greenwood all throughout Oklahoma. All right, so action number 3 that finally did free all the enslaved Africans in America was the Treaty of 1866, which was actually a treaty of, or a series of several treaties with different native tribes and native nations that finally abolished slavery and granted freemen rights within the tribes. Now, question number 2 for y'all. In the Treaty of 1866, America forced native tribes to give their previously enslaved Africans rights and land. Why do you think America did that? Especially with the context that America did not do that exact same thing in 1865 or 1863 when they freed their slaves or their enslaved population. So why do you think they did that for the native nations? Go ahead and leave your comment below. All right, y'all, this was a powerful episode and we tackled some really difficult points in American history. If you made it this far, thank you so much for tapping in with us. And if you learned anything in this process, please make sure you smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on a podcast, definitely make sure you give this episode and podcast a like. If you learned anything, share this video with a friend. And of course, make sure y'all subscribe. More than 90% of viewers watching this video right now are not subscribed. So don't do that, fam. Don't let that be you. Go ahead and click that subscribe button. We appreciate it. Now, today we focused on, and hopefully we taught you about the Indian Removal Act that was signed by President Andrew Jackson in 1830. We talked about the Trail of Tears, right? The forced relocation of over 60,000 Native Americans and their enslaved Africans to Indian territories. And we talked about the gradual freedom of enslaved Africans in America through the Emancipation Proclamation 1863, through the passing of the 13th Amendment in 1865, and through the Treaty of 1866, which finally freed the enslaved Africans in native territories, gave them land, and gave them rights in those tribes. Next week, family, we're going to continue our journey, right? So this whole season, this whole course is all about the steps and the road leading to Black Wall Street. All right, unfortunately, a lot of people only know about the destruction of Black Wall Street and not the rich history, the rich people, and the booster towns that led to the creation. So we're going to talk about Edwin McCabe and his vision of a Black American dream. We're going to explore the rise of some booster towns and the oil boom that defined early Oklahoma. So make sure to join us next week as we start to uncover some dreams and how those dreams were built out of resilience and strategic planning. Until then, thank you for tuning in to Black Study Snacks, where we give you bite-sized knowledge for hungry, melanated minds. I'm your host, Devon Chevelle, creator of Black Wall Street, the board game, and your professor of Black Studies and Entrepreneurship. I hope you keep dreaming, and I hope you keep on snacking. Peace.